Hello and welcome everyone to today's talk in the DS series. My name is Søren Askegaard. I'm a DS chair of social sciences, and it gives me very great pleasure to introduce my friend and colleague, DS senior fellow of social sciences, Pieter Vanhuysse. Pieter has his PhD from London School of Economics and Political Science, but usually only known by the first part of the name, LSE. He is a professor of political science and public policy at our Department of Political Science and Public Management. He's a very prolific writer in a number of subfields, political science, policy studies, political economy, and political sociology, to such an extent that when you Google him, the first qualifier that you get is author. And I'm very envious about that. When I Google myself, it says research, and that's kind of a, that's not the same thing, right? So, but it also...
You should see my royalties.
But it also is an indication of exactly that sort of non-placeability of Pieter and his research, which I think is why he belongs very well in the DS context, because one of the best things about him is his broad curiosity about complex social issues, non-reductionist social science, and big issues pertaining to long-term welfare and sustainability of our societies. And so you currently hold a Carlsberg monograph fellowship that you will share a little bit about. I think this topic is related, about intergenerational justice and sustainability development. And so without further ado, Pieter, I look forward to once again hear what you have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Very good to see you back, and thank you for this very generous intro. I like this non-reductionist element most of all. I think that's also why we're all here together at DS. So what I intend to do in the next 40 minutes or so with you is to share with you insights from a set of papers we've been working on since about 3 years, and will continue to for a couple of years down the line, where, if you like, the structuring question is as banal as it gets. One could argue as old as economics, namely, how many resources do different generations, in this case in Europe, give to or receive from each other over the life cycle? And secondly, through what mechanisms do these resource transfers go? That's an old question. What we think we contribute to it is that we, on the same question, shine a much wider light by looking not just as per usual in certainly my tribe, welfare studies, public policy, social policy analysis, namely the welfare state, but to go beyond that by trying to enlighten the same questions by looking also at the family realm, the transactions that happen, the transfers that occur within the household realm of money, commodities if you like, in the market, and time. Time, as you all know, as most of you are parents, or will be parents, caring for children, cooking, cleaning, gardening, transport, and so on. So I will be focusing on 3 papers in particular. The first one is basically one where we looked at the welfare state as per usual and tried to see within that one of only 3 realms, that one realm only, how important is age as a driver of redistribution across generations in this case, versus status, versus class. And that's basically a little tournament we do on that question. The second paper will be then, okay, given that we will have established that welfare states are also very much about age and not just class redistribution, how is it then organized? Who receives benefits? In this case, the 3 channels together, time, money, and public transfers. And how is that organized? And then thirdly, this is a work in progress still. Okay, so who pays that? Who is the main contributor of these 3 types of resources over the life cycle in Europe? So the first paper is basically where we do a little tournament between the 2 main contenders in my discipline, welfare state studies. The 2 main contenders for what are welfare states doing mostly tend to be either the Robin Hood function, You tax the rich or otherwise take it from them and you give it to the poor, roughly speaking. So inter-status, inter-class redistribution, or the piggy bank function. Yeah? So not literally a piggy bank. Is it not that we, on the whole, use the welfare state for saving for our own private older selves later, but we use this very convenient observation that at any given moment in time, a society consists in cross-section of young people, middle-aged people, and elderly people, and we face this, this life cycle consumption financing problem, right? This is a general problem, very fundamental, across time, across space, across levels or ages of democracy. Basically, young people and elderly people tend to consume more than they earn through income. And to help them consume, to eat, and so on, we typically tax the middle-aged, the working-aged, who have a net extra income above their consumption. So in this project, basically, let me give you a preview. So much to some people's consternation within my tribe, we find that it is not even close. So by our best estimate, it is the piggy bank function that is more important empirically. That's not to say normatively, ideologically, but empirically, than the Robin Hood function. So we claim that while welfare states may have evolved for historical reasons to do many, many things, primarily speaking and empirically speaking, they are not primarily or solely responsible for this status story, interstatus distribution. And I'll come back to what follows from that, or what might follow from that, for our understanding of the welfare state. So here we look at 22 European countries, over 200,000 Europeans, and we try and do a sort of a, this is the eyeball study, of course, just, yeah. So a three-dimensional story where we have deciles by status, from the lowest status category to the highest, and by age, the youngest to the oldest. And then here we have basically, in this case, for benefits, what we get from the welfare state. You know, the third dimension, and that's in terms of prime age labor income is standardized. So the way I look at this is just the eyeball. I don't know what you see. Some people tell me it's a bird. For me, the association is basically with a gently flowing river, flowing towards you, downstream, but very gently, right? With a wide riverbed. A wide riverbed that's actually very interestingly asymmetrical, right? And the left bank is flowing towards you, so the left bank is much steeper, much higher than the right bank. The elderly, on the whole, it seems, in Europe, on average, while we have pro-elderly, pro-young sort of a right bank here, yeah, the elderly one is higher, and when it comes to the status gradient, as I said, the river of benefits flows gently downstream. There's no strong status gradient when it comes to benefits. This is taxes. Different story altogether, yeah? Our gently flowing river is now actually flowing underground. Even kids, even the elderly pay taxes. How do kids pay taxes? Well, kids consume goods, yeah, on which there is VAT, for example, which are imputed to the kids because they consume them directly. That is why. But basically, what you see here really is, you know, our gently flowing underground river, this case, cascades very fast for most, but not all SES groups, and very steeply, mainly in the Middle Ages, once again. So here is where our notions of Robin Hood actually are confirmed. Yeah? So we do see here a strongly progressive element in the tax component only of the tax and transfer machines that are welfare states, the tax tool only. And even here, it's not just that. We also see the strong age component. So then we basically, you know, bring the two together to, if you like, provide a comprehensive story of net benefits, benefits minus taxes for our 200,000 plus Europeans over these 22 countries, where again, we have, you know, as you could expect, a combination of the two prior graphs. So we have now actually in net terms, we have our river banks back above ground, yeah? In net terms, both the young and the elderly receive more than they contribute. And again, we have this very strong underground cascading sort of waterfall, if you like, especially the Mid Ages. So this is how we read that visually, at least. And interestingly, here at least we put a side note. So we certainly see. You can discuss the term. Yeah, gerontocracy is a strong term, but we certainly see that in each SES group. So if you go here, you use the horizontal quantiles. Yeah, the oldest age group receives the most. The oldest decile receives the most. So that's a strong, again, pro-elderly indication. But we also detect what I call, you can again debate the terms, Rawlsian nodes or sidelines. So, for example, in the lowest SES group, all age groups receive positive net benefits. So this is this group here. Yeah? The lowest decile here, they're all above ground. Yeah? Secondly, in the sort of very wide age categories between 10 and 62, on average in Europe, the lowest SES group receives the most. So this is, a strong, if you like, progressive or Rawlsian touch. And then we use statistical techniques called Shapley decomposition techniques to play a tournament. So we try and see, okay, for example, when it comes to this now dependent variable net benefits, okay, of all the variance in that dependent variable that is jointly explained by status and age, what is most important? And then we come to this conclusion that I said, so basically it's not even close. Right? So on the whole, age distribution is much more important than status distribution. We do some robustness tests, but basically to give you a ballpark figure, so of the 100% variance in this dependent variable net benefits that is jointly accounted for by age and status, something in the range of 28% only is class or status. In other words, 78% or there around, depending on definitions, is age. So that may have, major implications, we think, for how we look at just this one channel, the welfare state. Yeah? So many people in my tribe think it's the welfare state is a tool for, playing Robin Hood. Yeah? Others think it's, for, softening the effect of pure market competition on individuals. Decommodification is a term. Others say, well, it's about, making family members, mainly women, less dependent materially on their husbands or on their families. And we don't dispute any of these many functions that welfare states, which are complex architectures, perform. What we do suggest on empirical grounds, not normative grounds, is a shift in focus, if you like. Yeah? So, namely to think about welfare states also, I would even say primarily, in terms of this fundamental life cycle consumption financing problem that they help to solve. Basically, welfare states, first and foremost, in addition to many other things they do, are piggy banks in cross-section. As I mentioned, that's a deeper problem in a way than what sort of welfare state do we have, or how much is our tax levels, or what sort of pension system do we have, because literally across time and place, at least since we have evolved in our hunter-gatherer years to live beyond our fertile and productive ages, we've had to solve this in one or the other way, this fundamental life cycle consumption financing problem. Yeah. As I will now try and indicate to you that we in Europe have a particular way of doing that, of solving that problem, by using the welfare states to, but also families, to a very interesting division of labor here. And that brings me to my next paper. I always try to, when I have the research out, to do some more popular or some more, dissemination-oriented activities. So this first project was then recently in sort of policy brief format given to a social policy forum, and also we are at DS after all, aren't we? A demography forum, so different disciplines. So remember the second question. Okay, we now have established, if you believe me, that welfare states are very importantly, we even claim primarily, about being piggy banks in cross-section, about age redistribution, right? Okay, if that's the case, okay, who gets what from whom, when? How is that then organized? That sort of life cycle, in this case, benefits or net resources transfer. And before I delve into the analysis here, let me point to you something again that may be too obvious, like my structuring questions from the start, right? It's too obvious almost to reflect upon. But again, widely beyond what part of the world we live in, what part of welfare state we have, and so on. Certainly modern societies have a very asymmetric way of taking care of the early and late sections of the life cycle, of the young and the old, if you like. Yeah? Wherever you go, even in Japan, even in very different non-Western rich countries, yeah? On the whole, even in Taiwan these days, which was for a long time an exception to that, with its filial obligations to parental care, but this is now changing to there. So everywhere we go, we, the middle-aged, the working age, let's call us, yeah, take care of our parental generation as a generation. Yeah? So we pay taxes and social security contributions, not to take care of our father or mother, but as our generation of taxpayers to the generation of our mother as a generation. That is socialized, the upward care, if you like, for the elderly. The downward care, any discussion of, social investment states or public education paradigms notwithstanding, it is actually parents who privately take care of the main brunt of the burdens of rearing children. And that's very important for what follows in the next two sections of my talk. So we still privatize, not entirely, but largely, the care for our young. I did some homework on this to try and check myself, and basically I came up with two historical exceptions to my current rule, where actually the rearing of children, the downward care, was socialized. One was the 1960s age of Aquarius type of communes in the West Coast. Spectacular failure, none of them exist today. The other is the kibbutzim system also in the 50s and 60s in Israel. The kibbutzim still exist today, but basically they no longer function according to their original design principles. But in the 60s, it was the case that actually the rearing of children was largely socialized. Parents had visiting rights in the high day of the kibbutz, 65 and so on. You actually visited, if I remember correctly. They had visiting rights to their children in the communal place where the children spent their day, and then, after an hour or two, they went back home alone. Yeah. Needless to mention, this too is spectacularly imploded as a model of taking care of the downward transfers. Now, linked to that asymmetric socialization of the two directions of care is, of course, very closely intertwined, an asymmetric visibility in statistics. Yeah? What I and my generation of taxpayers pay in terms of taxes and social security transfers to pay for my parent generation's healthcare, long-term care, pension needs is, partly because it's about strangers, right? Is very fully registered and accounted for in national account systems. Yeah? The time and the money that I spent as a father of a 6-year-old, as is my wife, paying for clothes and food, driving her around to ballet, reading bedtime stories, cooking, cleaning, and so on. Needless to mention, it's very, very, very imperfectly known and registered, and thereby also invisible. So to go back to my structuring question from the first slide, right? What and how many resources do we transfer across generations in Europe? And to answer that structuring question, by just looking at the welfare state, the public realm, the first transfer type, that's a little bit like the drunken guy who's stumbling around at night looking for his lost car keys under the street lamps, yeah? Because that's where the light shines, yeah? Because the light shines there, yeah? Even though, we would need to actually shine a much wider light to answer that question. And that's in a sense what we try to do with this set of projects. So in the second project, we look at 10 countries around 2010, different forms of welfare state regime. And so what we think we contribute is we shine a wider light by looking at two different accounting techniques, essentially, national transfer accounts, national time transfer accounts, which bring these two other channels into the picture, money transfers, commodities bought in the market, and time transfers, unpaid household labor, caring, cooking, cleaning, gardening, what have you. We bring that in and we try and estimate through a generally standardized and comparable methodology the age elements of that. So to give you a preview there too, so, you know, at least what many in my tribe have been saying for a while is not, you know, radically rejected or dismissed. So when it comes to the welfare state, as a welfare state, the public realm alone, it remains true what I also showed you in my first of the three, if, you know, the gently flowing river, if you remember. We are very, on a per capita basis even, not just because we have more elderly people, on a per capita basis, very pro-elderly oriented welfare states. So much remains true. But secondly, then when you shine a wider light on the much more hidden family realm, the picture isn't just more complete, which would be good enough. Yeah? We claim it changes, it flips around, it becomes radically different, that picture, rather than just more complete. All of a sudden, as societies, which is of course a bigger umbrella term than welfare states, every single one of the societies we look at in this work transfer all of a sudden, turn out to transfer more per capita resources over the three channels combined to each child than they do to each elderly person. So this is how this is done then in the national transfer accounts. This is basically an accounting system, as dry as it gets, to try and bring the x-axis, the age, the life cycle, if you like, into the equation. And on the y-axis here, the vertical axis, you have basically whatever people are receiving, let us say now here, in terms of total life cycle deficit, standardized over prime age labor income. So a value, let us say, for a 10-year-old of 70, what shall we say, or 80, yeah? Concretely means that in total terms, the three channels combined, your average 10-year-old in Europe receives the equivalent of about 80%, so what is it? 9 months wages in his society, 80% of 12 months. Yeah? But let's take it step by step. So on the left hand, we have what typically NTA does. They take one step further by bringing in, you know, family transfers. And so public transfers, the welfare state if you like, and private family cash, but only cash, combined on your left-hand panel, this is how it looks. So it still looks, even though we now took one extra step by bringing in family cash into the welfare state story, we still have basically this story of pro-elderly welfare states, right? On the whole, on your left-hand panel, yeah, from around, basically from around 58 already, people, not 65 or 67, 58 already, people start once again becoming net recipients above the x-axis, rather than contributors below, of these resources. Yeah. Actually, one thing that this also allows us, this methodology, is to, you know, inductively or empirically define what is old, what is young. Not as per usual, as per the last 100 plus years, young is somebody until 18 and then he can start voting, and old is somebody until what is 65, 67 nowadays, as per tradition. No, we said no, inductively you can say, well, an old person, in whichever realm you take now, an old person is somebody who at the latter end of his life once again becomes a net recipient above the line of the resource in question. And the same for young. Yeah? So by that definition, we can actually spell some insights on why even the 1867 obsession is basically rather misguided by that particular inductive definition. Left-hand panel. This is why, like ball or eyeball sort of approaches, for lectures. It just needs an eyeball on the middle panel to tell you why shining a wider light once more, on time this time, pun intended, is important, yeah? Just the form of the curve in the middle panel is very different, as you can see from the left wing or the left-hand panel, right? Children, especially very young children, in Europe on average receive enormous amounts of time. Yeah? No surprises here perhaps, but we try and put a price tag on that. I can come back to how we do that if you want later. Yeah? But on average, for example, your average 1-year-old in Europe receives in time alone caring, mothering, fathering, grandparenting to a limited extent, more than 12 months of prime age labor income. Yeah? And all along, the curve looks different. Yes? So while, as I said, so in this realm here, people inductively become net recipients again around age 58. The current moniker of the new active grandparenting and 70 is the new 60 type of stories, at least in the time realm, seems to be true. That's to say, people in the latter cycle of their life keep on giving as opposed to receiving time much longer than they do cash and public transfers until around their late 70s, as you can see. But secondly, and importantly, I would argue, compared to what parents in the rush hour of their life produce, it's peanuts. Yeah? So grandparenting is real, or the new active grandparenting, we find some evidence for that in terms of time. But compared to what parents do, we argue one shouldn't over-exaggerate that. So then we come to the final sort of the fuller, can't say fullest, but fuller picture, the total story. Once again, public transfers together with familial time transfers and familial cash transfers all together. And that's where you see probably my title coming from. Yes? So elderly welfare states, perhaps embedded within societies composed of very strongly child-oriented families read parents. Yeah? Why is that? Well, we think it's simply because of the fact that empirically speaking, even in Southern Europe, even in Eastern Europe, Bulgaria, Romania, today, 3 generational households are a thing of the past. Yeah? So it may be true that active grandparents in their early 70s, certainly they're probably cognitively and emotionally and physically fitter than they used to be a generation ago. That may well be true. But it means that if they want to contribute, they still have to come in a couple of hours a week to babysit or to take care of the grandchildren. Yeah? That they probably do, but we look here in net terms. They also may receive things. And secondly, compared to the rush hour of life, it pales. Yeah? As I mentioned, so our inductive approach to think or define ages, or the cutoff points for young, middle-aged, old, inductively as opposed to as per tradition, shows you that the 3 channels combined, kids in Europe on average remain kids not until 18, but into their mid-20s. Yeah? Parents of teenagers or of university students will not be surprised, I think. Small kids, small problems, and so on. Secondly, forget about 67 or these sort of debates we still have in our pension policy debates in Europe, in Denmark, in Sweden. Actually, de facto, the 3 channels combined, people once again become net resource recipients, the 3 channels combined, around age 60. So active resource productive lives, what we here define as adult lives, are very short. Yeah? They're shorter than we even think. Yeah? 25 to 60 on average for Europe. Secondly, if you look at the left-hand element here, these are enormous resources for the very young. Yeah? In fact, this right-hand panel shows you that on average in Europe, for the countries we looked at, kids between 0 and 9, so the first 10 years of their lives, receive between 130 and 92% of prime age labor income in those 3 channels combined, which is more than even the oldest old in our sample the 90 pluses receive. Yeah. We talked about traditional approaches to adulthood. Well, we can start in most of Europe, at the national level at least, voting at 18. Yeah? By our inductive approach, actually, right until 17, so this point here, kids still receive 70% of primary labor income, which is the same that the 80 pluses in Europe receive. Yeah? Hence our insistence that we need to shine a wider light on the family realm and what happens in that family realm. This is how one other way in which we argue it matters to do that. So this is what my tribe attempts to do. The welfare state studies look at public transfers, and they should. Yeah? Pro-elderly welfare states that also have a bit of education happening. Yeah? Public schooling and all the rest of it. Yeah? Tertiary education and so on, in net terms. We then look at the invisible realm of time, mainly the very young, and cash for example, teenagers, right? You see why that becomes a very important addition to the debate that is, changing a bit the terms of the debate. Yeah? It's not just more complete. Yeah? That's another way of showing why it matters in our view. If we just look at the welfare state realm, the children to elderly ratio, as we define it inductively, as I mentioned, is 0.4. In the welfare state realm, on average, in per capita terms, each child receives about 40% of what each elderly person receives. Yeah? As we know, in a sense, or thought we knew. Yeah? Education is, however costly it may be, is less costly than pensions, healthcare, and so on. You then stepwise shine your wider light, and the ratio flips around, yeah? From 0.4 to 2.23, all three channels combined. And that's why we think it matters to ask our old question, with new analysis or new data. And then again, I tried to spread the word a little bit. So actually, the Independent was a little bit more accurate. I think you'll agree with, in sort of relating my message, than, for example, the World Economic Forum. They went for the clash of generations take, and then in fact, they got together at Corre, and the late Jim Voppel, we also had I think it was in March, wasn't it, Corre? Yeah. A contribution in a book on aging Denmark by Rockwool, where we tried to bring that message. Okay. Remember the last question. Okay, who pays all that? Who contributes all these resources that we now established over these three different realms? So here we try to actually, we start with the same story, so this is not new anymore for you. The public realm, middle is familial money, the right is familial time, nothing new, except maybe to once again tell you, okay, the welfare state really is, as you can see, eyeballing, a three-generational affair, right? Kids benefit, pensioners benefit even more. Yeah? The family realm, we think because of the disappearance of three-generational households in Europe, is essentially a two-generational realm. Any talk of active grandparenting, which is real, but marginal, notwithstanding. So now, okay, we said, okay, so it's probably, if it's kids, we need to think about parents here. So with the data limitations we had, what we could do using the European Union survey on income and labor conditions, or also harmonized budget surveys, is to only think about parenthood in binary terms, which is fair enough. So we can only talk about somebody who is or who is not a parent of 1 or of 2 or of 3 or of 7. That we cannot do. And more importantly, our definition by constraint of parenthood is cohabitation based. So it's under the roof parents. It's people in adult ages who live together under the same roof with younger people in their care. Yeah? That's a limitation that I put on the table from the start because, for example, we can fully capture what divorced parents who moved out bring to the table. We can fully capture it, but we cannot code it as parental transfers. It will be intergenerational, inter-household transfers. Divorced fathers, for example, who moved out. On the other hand, the silver lining, the surveys in question allow people who live under the same roof with dependent children to identify themselves as non-biological parents. And we captured that as parental transfers, foster parents of different sorts, new husbands, new wives, moving in and so on. That we can take into account as parental transfers. So here's the novelty. Now we do a similar analysis only for the working life segment of society, the same countries, of non-parents, the full lines if you like, in the same 3 resource type channels as before, versus parents. So left hand panel first. Essentially, there's no real story when it comes to the left hand panel. Yeah? So the left hand panel, the welfare state if you like, on the whole, non-parents contribute more than do parents, and then it switches around age 45, which is probably where, when parents can fully go back to the labor markets, 2 of them and so on, we think. And moreover, cumulatively, non-parents actually contribute more public transfer than parents, we estimate. So, but no real shocker here. Yeah? The other 2 realms, of course, the eyeball shows you again a lot, yeah? Is that, when it comes to familial money and time transfers, there's a huge difference. Yeah? In fact, when it comes to money, for example, parents of university students will once again not in agreement. These 25, 26, 27-year-old university students, for example, receive still, in fact, rather than contributing familial cash transfers. Yeah? So only parents, in addition to what they contribute in the public sector, in the welfare state realm, contribute many other resources in terms of time and money. And we don't think it's a gender story, by the way. It's not a motherhood story. We think it's a parenthood story. We do the same analysis now for these different countries in Europe, father non-fathers, yeah, versus mothers non-mothers. Yeah? So what we think is the main story that stands out is the difference between parents and non-parents rather than between genders. If you look at the left-hand panel here, mothers, and the left-hand panel here, fathers, there's little difference in the composition of the overall transfer package. Parenthood, we think, informs us most about the composition, about the size of the package, and then within that package, we do see that indeed parents who are fathers, men, mainly provide familial money, whereas women, for a whole host of reasons which we are not able to enlighten you upon, to do with evolving norms and culture and so on, it is mother who provides similar total packages of resources, but mainly in terms of time. Yeah? But we do claim here that the main difference is between mothers and non-mothers, fathers and fathers, even on an eyeball analysis. And then we try to do something that is a bit of a stretch, but is also very common in generational accounting, for example, even in fertility rate or life expectancy calculations. When you look at the cross-sectional analysis, the snapshot account, and you try to then actually simulate that over the life cycle by looking at today's 20-year-old Dane and today's 30-year-old Dane and his whole package of different transfers. And then you say, okay, how would our today's 20-year-old behave when he's 30? Well, for that, the best we can do is to take today's 30-year-old's behavior, impute it to the 20-year-old. So that's a transversal exercise that is also in generational accounting. Also, by the way, when economists want to see how much is being saved in the economy, they do the same thing. They take a snapshot and they then try to do this transversal flows to stock analysis. A lot of information here, but I want to point you to the blue story. Yes, so as per usual, time, money, public transfers, non-parents. Time, money, public transfers, parents. Same story now over the working life for Europe. And this is the most, if you like, synthetic story, 2.66. On average, these are population weighted averages for the countries. Our best estimates that are basically robust to different assumptions about growth and interest rates, they are quite robust to that. Our best calculation says that on average, over the working life, the 3 channels combined, parents in Europe contribute 2.66 times as many resources than do non-parents over their 35 or so years that they are in working life. And secondly, that's important because, as per before, remember what I said on the left-hand panel, if we were to just look at the public realm, the welfare state, our conclusion would be qualitatively very different. Then we would be forced to say, well, actually, parents contribute fewer taxes and social security contributions in net terms than do non-parents, about 27% fewer. Yeah? That is why we think shining a wider light matters so much on the family realm of time and look at the familial realm combined. Non-parents barely contribute anything extra to what they do in public realm. Parents, in addition to what they contribute in the public realm, contribute a multiple of that in the private realm. Yeah? And that is why we all of a sudden, our ratio flips around, 0.73 to 2.66 this time. Remember what I said in the previous study. Another flip around story. Yeah? So, what follows? Well, first of all, it follows that, by looking just at the public realm, we are really a little bit biased because, all public transfers, or all non-parental transfers in this case, which are public transfers, are visible statistically. Yeah? But only 1/4 of those that parents do are visible, even statistically. And yeah, like I said, this ratio flips around, yes? So clearly, very different policy debates will happen based on that ratio, which was, prior state of the art, we believe, versus this ratio, yeah? About, what to do with family policies, how to help parents, what can we do to support social investment, and so on and so on. Yeah? Interestingly, 2.66 is a takeaway average for Europe. You probably noticed who's on top. Much to our consternation, the Swedes and the Finns, who are here. Within this small sample, it is the famously family-friendly welfare states of Nordic Europe, yeah, who may well be family-friendly, but in a particular sense, we argue. Yeah? They're family-friendly in the sense of helping women work. They're not family-friendly in reducing the overall burdens on parents in these societies. Yeah? They are, in fact, leading above places like Belgium and so on in that regard. So lastly then, okay, what do we conclude? Yeah? So clearly, it seems that maybe there's a bit of a high burden. It's 2.66, let's keep that in mind now. Yeah? Economists would say, well, we love our children, which means that our demand for children as parents is highly price inelastic. In other words, we can be taxed. It is efficient from a purely economic point of view, Ramsey efficiency, reductionist approach, certain to public policy, to tax parents. Yeah? And that's probably maybe one reason why we see what we see, this very strong extra burden on parents. Yeah? I needn't add here that this seemingly efficient economically speaking, taxation on the good children may have wildly suboptimal social implications. For example, the low fertility rates we see in most of Europe, and the still rising rates of intentional childlessness in Europe. Yeah? So, we took that allegory one step further, and just like you have VAT rates in place on everything today in Europe, our shoes, our laptops, and our watches, right? VAT rates are basically taxes on consumption value, correct? The average for that, de facto in Europe, is 12%, and it varies. Our method allows us to do a similar, it's a stretch, but it's an illuminative stretch, we think, a similar analysis for the implicit tax, implicitly, unwittingly perhaps, currently in place on the consumption goods children. By looking at overall, with the same approach, in terms of primary labor income years, consumption across Europe over the working life. So on average, that's about 10 years. Of the 35 years we work, we spend 10 consuming stuff. And then we use that as our denominator for our tax rate, where the numerator of that tax rate on children is the same as before. Yeah? So the net extra contributions of parents, net of those of non-parents, the extra, in terms of public transfers, money transfers, time transfers. As you remember, in the public realm, parents have a negative transfer. If anything, they are subsidized by the welfare state, subsidized. We then end private familial transfers, private time transfers, and the story flips around. Yeah? So these two together then, this plus this is that, lead one to, you know, for the sake of the allegory, to say that, well, the de facto tax in place on children when it comes to the public and the money channel is about 2.5 times the one de facto in place on shoes and laptops. Yeah? We do the same when it comes to time transfers. The implicit tax on parental time, which they could have used doing other things, right, such as having leisure or consumption. Yeah? There's always alternative uses to a resource. Yeah? The time that parents spend or the money that parents spend on a child could be used alternatively, correct? So that transfer, or that tax rather, that sort of consumption tax on children with the time is about 6 times higher than what we have de facto on our laptops and our Coca-Cola bottles. Yeah? So, what follows? Well, children are many things. Many people, they say, well, you know, nothing follows because, you know, like pets, when you buy a dog, you can't complain later on that the state should subsidize his food or his, you know, walking the dog time. Yeah? Same with parents. Well, clearly that's not true because parents also in raising children may have fun or not. Certainly they provide the next generation of taxpayers, yeah? Whose taxes then will fund everybody's public goods and everybody's pension benefits, irrespective of whether those people are parents or not, right? That's a public good. There's a big debate now about the ecological problems of that, because by definition, it's only people who pollute, so having children by that mistaken shortcut means that you know, pollute the environment. How else could you? I mean, the point is that we think kids are the three together. They're private consumption goods for their parents, public investment goods for their parents and non-parents in their generation, and as well they are, you know, a burden on the environment by mere fact of being alive. If that's true, it also means that you cannot say, as many people today claim, that we should tax parents for having children for environmental reasons. Logically, you shouldn't say that, without then also saying, well, in that case, you have to also subsidize parents for the public good component, the positive externalities that the children provide. One doesn't go without the other, otherwise you are illogical. It's not normative, it's not ideological, it's not political, it's logical. Yeah. Going back to 2.66, well, this is we talked here about contributions, resources, yeah? Of course, as I mentioned, resources have alternative uses, yeah? And so by the time parents reach 65, the money they spent on children will not have been spent on going to the Bahamas, working more, or other things, yeah? And yet, the rewards on different forms of savings, so let's say saving in, you know, portfolios of assets of different sorts, real estate or shares, versus spending it on children who will be the next generation of taxpayers, are very asymmetrically handled too. That's a double whammy. It's a different thing. Yeah? Technically, we could easily solve that. We could easily make there to be a return on the investment component of raising children. That can be done. Just empirically, it cannot be observed. No society does that. Yeah? In practice, basically, it seems that we actually let parents subsidize the reproduction of society, which of course is a strong public good, literally vital to life, if you like. Yeah? And so, if that's true, this double whammy, we may need to think again about family policy, time policy, work-family reconciliation policies of different sorts, because it may be true that unwittingly, hidden behind that sort of a streetlight parameter, we are truly very heavily taxing reproduction of society. I didn't know Sisyphus was a father. Thank you.
Thanks, Pieter. I have what's probably a fairly simple question, but what is it about 58-year-olds that makes them start kind of being a net cost to society. I tend to think 58-year-olds as pretty self-sufficient people, but
Well,
I'm
we
not
talk
sure.
about averages here, right? So
Yes.
talking about, so there's lots of, I mean, just 15 years ago, this was truly an exception in Europe, yeah? Just 15 years ago, in that age bracket around 60, especially among women, labor market participation rates back then in a place like Italy or Ireland or Belgium for that matter was around 20 to 30%. Yeah. It's going up, of course, it has been going up, but it's not 100% yet. So, I mean, for all sorts of reasons, care is one reason, unemployability may be another, burnout or all sorts of physical and mental health reasons may be third reason and so on. But on average, we find that in resource contribution terms, that's a different thing than just working, right? Resource contribution terms, that's a cutoff point. It's purely inductive.
Thanks. On that note, is healthcare part of the equation, or because
Yes.
yeah?
Yes.
Okay.
Hi. One of the things about using time as a resource is that you need to be able to spend the time on your children. So when you notice that Finland spends more time on their children, is that because the welfare state allows them to do that? Whereas perhaps in another welfare state that either doesn't have the funding or is deliberately not child-friendly, they can't spend their time on it, and so that might end up sort of showing up in your figures.
The answer is complex and context dependent. So in Italy, probably it's because, you know, you must. Yeah? The state doesn't help you, so you must take care of your children. It's called familialism in our discipline. Yeah? Indeed, as you noted, in Nordic Europe, where there's, at least compared to Southern Europe, much more extensive family policies in place, childcare facilities in place, and so on. But also, remember, we have also very long and generous parental leaves. Yeah? That is also part of the story. Yeah? But on the whole, indeed, here parents do have an option. This is what we call defamilialization policies. Yeah? So it depends on the institutional architecture.
So I have more of a methodological question. It seems key in your approach that you have a way to aggregate time with other resources. Mm-hmm. So what is the assumption that you make when you take time and then you convert it into financial resources? Because
yes.
Could imagine one perspective go Marxian, and then time has the same value for everybody. You can go the other way, neoclassical, and doesn't have the same value for everybody.
Crucial question, and it's something I'm glad to address. So basically, there's two main approaches. So what we have already, this is something we have had for a lot of years now, about 20 years now in Europe, the Harmonized European Time Use Survey. We have the minutes that Europeans spend time doing different things. That we have. Yeah. But the question becomes double. First of all, okay, how to allocate those minutes? Yeah? Suppose a mother of two who's married spends a Tuesday evening 1 hour cooking a cake. Yeah? We know that. That lady at that moment spent 60 minutes cooking a cake. That we know. Yeah? The question becomes, okay, on the one hand, how do you allocate the 60 minutes making a cake to her, respectively her husband and the kids? And we have rules for that. In this case, for example, it would be 1/4 each, yeah, so 50 minutes for each of the 4 family members. But more importantly then, okay, how do we put a price tag on that? Yeah? And there's 2 approaches for that again. The economic approach, which we discard for, reasons of basically of plausibility, is the so-called opportunity cost approach. So in our example, what would that mother have earned in the labor market if she hadn't been baking the cake? Yeah? We reject that approach for the simple reason that it would lead to the extremely counterintuitive and highly contestable conclusion that a banker baking a cake, that cake would be valuable 20 times as much as a teacher or even a baker. Yeah? So that approach we don't take. We alternatively take the so-called replacement wage approach. So what we have here for example, caring and household labor, we have 20 different categories, 20 different activities for which we had the time. You name it, gardening, driving around, cooking, cleaning, you name it. For each of which we found 20 equivalent wages for each country. Yeah? It's a real effort. Yeah? And those wages, in this example, so baking a cake would be your average hourly wage of a baker in your society would have been used as the value for that, and then divided among the 4 household members. That's the approach we took. Cor.
Yeah, as an outsider, it seems. As an outsider, it seems a little strange this that you insist on adding the financial and the time, kind of, and go through the effort of finding an exchange rate. Why not just say, in terms of money, it goes this way. In terms of time, it's a different picture where the children.
I mean, to decompose the components are.
Yeah, it's kind of like you have these two different, and then you add them up.
Okay.
So why is there such a need for adding them up and say there's only one dimension financial, but
There isn't, you're right. So we do this because the 2.6 is a sort of our take-home message. As I told you, the table has a density of information. We can spend 2 hours on that alone. And indeed, there's a good case to basically do the same analysis by transfer type. Yeah?
Yeah.
And indeed, as you would expect, the conclusion would be radically different by
Yeah.
type. Yeah.
But I guess in my discipline, there's often resistance to say, if it cannot be summarized in one number, don't make that one number, because it has different components.
Well, I would argue it can be summarized.
Yeah.
I would also argue it would be even more complete to do it all, which is what we do in the paper, obviously.
Yeah.
We talk about different channels, each by one, and then we do the final. And this is what I emphasize in the lecture. Yeah, but
Yeah.
basically, it makes sense indeed, as you say, to look at, okay, what do we see in the welfare state? What do we see in private cash alone and in time alone? Especially
Yeah.
time, as you saw, the picture is radically different. So
Yeah.
to do that, that makes sense too. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. I really enjoyed it. Thank you very much. When you're presenting the results, you present the averages, right? And so the question is that you talked about before, there are differences between Northern and Southern European countries. So I was wondering, because of these differences in the amount of public support that are to children, for example, in different countries, also the role of grandparents as well. Mm-hmm. So in general, are you more interested in generalizing across Europe, or maybe looking more at the role of context, right? So how differences, if there are, what differences there are across different contexts?
So both, but the big picture story first, and that's also what I focused on here.
Yes.
But I mean, as I already indicated, we were absolutely shocked to see, and we are still partly puzzled to see that 2.66 the baseline. Yeah. But as we said, so 3.17 for Finland, and basically 3 for Sweden. We did not expect that. Yeah. We have post hoc partial explanations for it. We think it's to do with the fact, as I mentioned earlier, that again the replacement wage approach. Yeah. So in Nordic Europe, on the one hand, we have generous and long parental leaves, yeah, for which we use the replacement wage approach. So in other words, the wages in place in Nordic Europe for carers, for nannies, for child carers. Yeah? Now, compared to other countries in Europe that have long and seemingly generous parental leave, like Eastern Europe, for example, has 3 years of parental leave, yeah, but they pay peanuts. Yeah? Here we don't pay peanuts. On the one hand, service sector wages are comparatively higher in Nordic Europe than in the rest of Europe. And more generally speaking, Nordic European wage distributions are much more compressed. The tails are less important. Yeah? We tax the very rich for comparatively more. We give comparatively more to the poor. We're bigger Robin Hoods, if you like, than certain Europe. So that's partly why we see what we see in terms of these what you call contextual differences. Yeah? But partly we're still puzzled.
So hi Pieter, thanks for a great lecture. So I was a little bit, just a very short comment on your description of your tribe. I think it's a little bit unfair. I mean, there is a lot of research on the development of pensions and so on, which of course address the piggy bank. But I think overall you're right that inequality is maybe more in vogue. So turning to inequality, what's the inequality story of? Because I think, I mean, you could say that the argument is that the welfare state is redistributive because of the progressive tax system and so on. But I mean, of course, with the time transfers, the interfamily transfers, I mean, they're totally unregulated and will probably, I mean, not compensate inequalities, but rather really kind of make them much more.
No doubt about it.
So, but what would be the political approach? Because I mean, we call our discipline political economy. So
we have some views on that.
Yeah.
So you know, and for you're very right. Yes. So it is clear that in this family realm that I focused on, there's enormous class gradients. Yeah. There's a really depressing analysis by a top-level Harvard professor a couple of years ago who showed that, for example, in terms of university enrollments, human capital, in America, by a form of IQ, so basically school readiness for university, per bit my paraphrasing, the dumbest high SES kids have higher enrollment now in American universities, even public universities, than, permit the language, the smartest low SES kids. That's an enormous problem for society because it's about equality of opportunity and unused resources. Yeah? So what to do? Well, a lot of things to do. So first thing to do would be to really properly now talk about social investment. We've been discussing it for 25 years now in our tribe. Yeah? In my view, this is still, compared to what else we are doing, peanuts. So what would follow? Well, much more extensive equality of opportunity, leveling the playing field policies. Things like early childhood policies. Yeah? High quality, universal, subsidized childcare, daycare, as we do to a larger degree in Nordic Europe than in the rest, but still not enough, I would say. Yeah? Time policies to properly start valuing, monetarily also, in terms of social security rights also, the time spent caring for children or for that matter the elderly, right? Which you typically have to do because nobody is payable or available. Yeah? So that's another thing. And more generally to basically, to think about what is it normal that we tax on average shoes 12% and the time of parents 77%? Or, there's no magic values obviously, but we think that, putting that on the table may change policy debates towards more properly valuing what parents do. And what the state can do is, of course, is to make it more equal. By, for example, leveling the playing field from early life onwards.
I think this was the time we had set aside for this. I don't know what is the value of that time, but I was greatly entertained. And I also think that it was great to see you, Pieter, prove the old dictum that a professor is someone who studies with great effort and intensely what the rest of us know, namely that kids are expensive, right? So thank you for this presentation, and I look forward to many more. Thank you for coming, everyone.
Thanks for coming.